There is a version of you that you do not want to meet. It walks behind you in every conversation, it sits quietly in the corner of your mind when you're alone, and it knows, with unnerving precision, every fear you've tried to hide, every desire you've denied, and every part of yourself you've politely exiled from view. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Not a ghost, not an enemy, but the collection of traits, emotions, and instincts we refuse to admit are ours. Here sups the paradox. The more we pretend the shadow isn't there, the more power it has over us. It shows up in the sharpness of our anger, the intensity of our jealousy, the odd moments where we surprise ourselves with cruelty or indifference. It slips through in ways we can't control, because it is the part of us we have never learned to work with. Jung was not the first to notice this. The Greek philosopher Socrates warned that the unexamined life is not worth living, but examination, when done honestly, is not just about admiring our virtues, it's about looking squarely at our capacity for selfishness, manipulation, even harm. In medieval theology, this was the work of confession. In Buddhist thought, it was the mindful confrontation of kleshas, the inner poisons of greed, hatred, and ignorance. But Jung's insight was unique. The shadow is not just a moral failing to be purged, it is also the seat of our unrealized creativity, courage, and vitality. The same place that hides our shame also hides our potential. In this conversation, we will walk slowly into that darker terrain. I will share with you 6 core insights, drawn from Jung's work, from philosophy, and from psychology, that will help you not only recognize your shadow, but begin a step-by-step process of working with it. This is not a quick fix. It's not a 3 tricks to be happy guide. Shadow work is a lifelong dialogue with the parts of yourself you'd rather keep hidden. But if you stay with it, you will discover something profound, that what you fear most within yourself is not here to destroy you, it's here to make you whole. 1. The shadow you hide shapes the life you live. Jung taught that what we repress doesn't vanish, it seeps into our actions, choices, and relationships. Until you face it, your shadow writes the script from behind the curtain. 2. Your judgments reveal more about you than about others. Nietzsche noted that we project what we cannot own in ourselves onto others. Learning to read your own criticism is the first map into your unconscious terrain. 3. Owning the darkness gives you back your power. In the Stoic tradition, confronting what frightens us, rather than avoiding it, turns fear into agency. What you integrate can no longer control you. 4. The shadow holds the keys to your creativity. Jung believed our most repressed impulses often mask our most vibrant potentials. What you fear in yourself may be the birthplace of your art, courage, or vision. 5. You cannot heal what you cannot name. Drawing from Freud's idea that making the unconscious conscious is the foundation of freedom, we'll explore practical techniques for identifying your shadow patterns. 6. Integration, not eradication, is the goal. Like the Taoist yin and yang, wholeness emerges not from purging darkness but from harmonizing it with the light. The shadow, when embraced, becomes an ally rather than a saboteur. Each of these insights will be its own deep exploration, a blend of story, philosophy, and step-by-step reflection, so that by the end you won't just understand shadow work, you'll have the beginnings of a personal practice. It began with a man who insisted he was never angry. Not once in 30 years, he told me, had he lost his temper. He was calm, rational, fair, or so he believed. But as his story unfolded, something curious emerged. His children avoided him, his wife spoke to him in carefully measured sentences, and his colleagues described him as difficult to approach. What he didn't realize was that his anger was present, just not in the way he imagined. It leaked out through sarcasm, through long silences, through a cutting precision in his words. He had spent his life repressing rage so thoroughly that he could no longer see it, but everyone else could feel it. Carl Jung would say, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow is not an abstract myth. It's the sum of all the thoughts, emotions, and traits you've decided are unacceptable. You push them down because they don't fit your image of yourself. You think, "That's not me. I'm not selfish. I'm not jealous. I'm not cruel." But here's the truth. Those rejected parts don't dissolve. They go underground. And underground, they grow in strange shapes. They influence the tone of your voice, the way you vote, the people you're drawn to, and the ones you avoid. They even decide, without your permission, what you find beautiful or repulsive. Think of the shadow like a river diverted into a hidden channel. You can't see where it runs, but it still carves the landscape of your life. Jung saw this most clearly in the patients who swore they were fine. Their lives seemed orderly, their manners polished, until some crisis cracked the facade. Then, all at once, a torrent of unprocessed feelings would flood out. Often they had no idea those emotions had been waiting there all along. Here sits the paradox. The more energy you spend denying your shadow, the more control it has over you. The man who never got angry had in truth built his whole life around avoiding his own rage. It shaped his marriage, his parenting, his career, not because he expressed it too much, but because he never learned to face it directly. In ancient Greek thought, this was the tragedy of hubris, the hero who believes he knows himself, yet is blind to the forces moving within him. In Buddhist psychology, it's called ignorance, mistaking your partial self for the whole. And yet, there is hope in this realization, because once you understand that the shadow you hide is silently scripting your life, you can begin to read the lines and, if necessary, rewrite them. Jung's insight is unsettling because it removes the luxury of thinking, "That's just the way I am," or "This is just bad luck." It asks us to take radical responsibility for the unseen half of ourselves. This is where shadow work begins, not with fixing, but with noticing. Tonight, when you lie in bed, consider this question. What might my life be trying to tell me about the parts of myself I have refused to see? The answer won't arrive all at once, but if you keep asking, the river will start to show itself. And when it does, you will have taken your first step into the shadow and toward a life that is truly yours. It happens in an instant. You see someone at work, on the train, or scrolling past on your screen, and something about them just irritates you. Maybe it's their voice, their confidence, the way they dress, or a casual comment they make. You tell yourself, "I just don't like that type of person." But here's the uncomfortable question. Why that person? Why that trait? Why is it that of all the countless imperfections in the world, certain ones light up your nervous system like a warning siren? Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster in the process." He was speaking of moral struggle, but there's a psychological truth buried inside it. The things we fight against most fiercely often reflect something within ourselves. Carl Jung gave this a name: projection. When we disown a quality in ourselves, we often spot it and overreact to it in others. It's as if our unconscious takes the trait we cannot accept, paints it onto someone else, and then invites us to judge it from a safe distance. For example, you might pride yourself on being humble, but you find yourself seething at arrogant people. You tell yourself it's because arrogance is ugly, and maybe it is. But what if your anger also hides a truth you can't face? What if you too long to take up more space, to speak with authority, to risk seeming confident, but you've decided that's not your kind of thing? Projection is the mind's clever way of keeping us from seeing ourselves. It preserves our self-image by outsourcing the qualities we deny. We remain the hero, Others become the villains, but in the process, we stay blind to the richness and complexity of who we really are. Nietzsche might say that when you look into someone else's darkness, you may be peering into a mirror. Jung would add the shadow that irritates you in others is a message from the parts of you that want to be recognized. Here sits a simple but confronting practice. For 1 week, every time you catch yourself judging someone harshly, especially for a personality trait rather than a harmful action, pause, write it down, be specific. She's too self-promoting. He's too passive. They're too dramatic. Then later ask yourself, when in my own life have I been like this, even in a small way? Or, more challenging still, where might I secretly want permission to be like this? The answers are rarely comfortable. You may resist them. You may want to explain them away. But if you can sit with that discomfort, you will begin to see the outlines of your shadow more clearly than almost any other method can provide. Because here sits the paradox. When you own the trait you've been projecting, you often find that your judgment of others softens, not because you now approve of every behavior, but because you've recognized the shared humanity beneath it. The sharp edges of criticism dull into understanding, and that understanding is the beginning of integration. The next time someone's presence makes you bristle, imagine you're looking into a fractured mirror. Ask yourself, what part of me lives here? The shadow will not always answer right away, but with patience it will begin to whisper truths you cannot unhear. A woman I once knew carried a fear so deep she couldn't even name it. It wasn't a fear of spiders or heights, it was a fear of her own temper. She'd grown up watching her father's anger explode without warning, and she'd vowed never to be like him. So she trained herself to swallow irritation, to smile when she felt wronged, to keep her tone polite no matter what. On the surface, it worked. People liked her. She seemed endlessly patient, but inside, pressure built. Tiny injustices, unmet needs, swallowed words. Eventually, her body began to rebel. Tension, headaches, stomach knots, sleepless nights. She had thought she was keeping the darkness contained. In truth, it was keeping her contained. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." The Stoics believed that what enslaves us is not the thing itself, but our fear of it. And when the thing is a part of ourselves, anger, desire, ambition, grief, the fear turns inward, twisting us into shapes we barely recognize. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly, people trying to outwit their shadow by denial. But denial doesn't erase darkness. It makes it uncontrollable. The only way to have agency over it is to own it, to say, yes, this is in me. Owning does not mean acting out every impulse. The Stoics would warn us that indulging every instinct is just another form of slavery. But ownership means we stop pretending the darkness isn't ours. We stop saying, I could never be cruel, and instead admit, I am capable of cruelty, and therefore I must be vigilant with it. This shift is powerful because it turns the shadow from a saboteur into a known quantity. A danger you see is a danger you can manage. The same woman who feared her temper eventually learned to name it as it rose. She practiced stepping away, breathing, speaking honestly instead of erupting, and slowly her headaches eased. The darkness didn't vanish, but it was no longer driving her life from the back seat. The Stoics trained themselves to rehearse feared scenarios, loss, humiliation, hardship, so that when they came, the shock was gone. You can do something similar with your shadow. Instead of pretending your capacity for greed, rage, or manipulation doesn't exist, spend time imagining how it might surface and how you would handle it with integrity. Because when you own the darkness, two things happen. You become harder to manipulate. No one can shame you with a truth you've already faced. You gain access to the energy bound up in repression. Fear drains power. Ownership restores it. Here sits your challenge. Think of one part of yourself you've spent years denying. Say it out loud, even if only to your own reflection. Then write down one way you could work with that part, rather than against it. You may feel an immediate release, as if the shadow breathes for the first time in years. That is the feeling of power returning to where it belongs, with you. The poet had written nothing for 3 years. Every morning he sat at his desk, hands poised over the keyboard, waiting for inspiration. But the sentences came out flat, lifeless. He told himself it was writer's block, that his best work was behind him. Then one night he dreamt of a house with a locked basement door. In the dream he felt a deep dread, but also an almost magnetic pull toward the door. When he finally opened it, he found a furious version of himself inside, screaming accusations he didn't want to hear. The next day he wrote 12 pages without stopping. Jung would not have been surprised. In his view, the shadow isn't just the home of shame or fear, it's also where our most vibrant, unclaimed energy lives. We don't only repress bad traits, we also repress talents, desires, and instincts that didn't fit the roles we were assigned early in life. Maybe you were told as a child to be quiet, and so your voice, your literal and metaphorical voice, went underground. Maybe you were shamed for being too sensitive, and so your emotional intuition, which could be the heart of your art, now hides in the dark. Or maybe you learned to suppress ambition because it made others uncomfortable, and so your drive to create a better life has been bound and gagged in the shadow. The ancient Greeks spoke of the daimon, a kind of guiding spirit, the source of your unique calling. Jung believed this daimon often hides in the shadow because it's dangerous to the version of you that fits in. But when you dare to look into the shadow, you sometimes find that what you feared most is actually the source of your aliveness. Creativity in this sense is not just about art. It's about restoring vitality. When you retrieve a lost part of yourself, your voice, your courage, your mischief, you recover not only the ability to make things but to live fully. A practical way to do this is through what Jung called active imagination. You sit quietly, invite the image of a shadow figure from your dreams, irritations, or daydreams, and you start a conversation. Ask it, what do you want? What have you been keeping for me? What happens if I let you speak? The answers may be strange, uncomfortable, even nonsensical. But if you listen without judgment, you may begin to notice an energy returning, an urge to write, to dance, to build, to speak. The poet from the dream began to write from the voice in his basement. The tone was darker, sharper, less likable than his earlier work, and yet it was alive. Readers could feel the pulse in it. The shadow, once integrated, doesn't just make you whole, it makes you potent, and potency is the lifeblood of creation. Here sits the invitation. Think of a part of yourself you've judged as too much, too loud, too selfish, too strange. What would happen if, for 1 hour, you gave it full permission to create something, not to act recklessly in life, but to express itself on paper, in music, in movement? You might be surprised to find that your shadow has been waiting, not to destroy you, but to help you bring something into the world that only you can create. A man in his 40s came to therapy for general dissatisfaction. He had a good job, a stable marriage, 2 children, no obvious crisis. But when asked what he wanted from life, his answer was always vague. I don't know, just more, I guess. One day, after months of talking around the subject, he finally blurted out, I think I hate my job. The words startled him, not because they were new, but because he had never said them aloud. And in that moment, the dull ache in his chest seemed to lift just a little. Freud once wrote, where ID was, there ego shall be. It's a clumsy translation, but Jung expanded the idea. Bringing the unconscious into consciousness is the foundation of growth. What we cannot name, we cannot work with. The shadow thrives in vagueness. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm fine," "It's no big deal," or "That's just how I am." As long as the truth remains blurred, it remains untouchable. But once you put it into words, it begins to lose its hold. This is why confession, in so many spiritual traditions, is not about punishment. It's about clarity. The moment you name a thing, it becomes visible, and what is visible can be approached, understood, even transformed. Jung encouraged his patients to track patterns that pointed toward the shadow, recurring emotional triggers, moments when your reaction feels bigger than the situation. Persistent daydreams or fantasies, even the ones you think are inappropriate or immature, traits in others that provoke strong judgment or admiration, projection at work again, repetitive life conflicts, the same type of argument, job struggle or relationship pattern returning again and again. Once you notice a pattern, the work is to give it a name, not a euphemism, but a direct description. I am jealous. I want to be seen as important. I resent my partner sips freedom. I avoid people who intimidate me because they make me feel small. It's tempting to soften these truths into something more socially acceptable, but the shadow responds to honesty, not spin. A practical exercise. Daily shadow journal. At the end of each day, write down one moment where you felt a strong emotional reaction, positive or negative. Ask, what exactly was I feeling? Then ask, if I stripped away the story I tell myself, what deeper need, fear or desire might be hiding here? Do this for 30 days, and patterns will begin to surface. The same emotions will show up in different disguises. That's your shadow waving from beneath the surface. Naming is not the end of shadow work, it's the doorway. Once you can say, "This is part of me," you have a chance to decide what to do with it. Without naming, you're wrestling an invisible opponent. The man who admitted he hated his job didn't quit immediately, but once the truth had a name, he could explore his options without the fog of denial. Within a year, he had changed fields entirely, not because the shadow went away, but because he had stopped pretending it wasn't there. So here sits the question for you. What truth about yourself have you been avoiding because you fear what will happen if you say it aloud? The shadow grows in silence, but once you speak, the healing begins. A young man once told me he wanted to kill his shadow. He had read about shadow work and decided the point was to get rid of every negative trait in himself: anger, envy, pride. He imagined emerging on the other side, pure, spotless, untouchable. But that's not shadow work, that's self-mutilation. Carl Jung warned against the fantasy of eradication. The shadow is not a tumor to be cut out. It is a limb you've forgotten how to use. Yes, it can lash out destructively, but it also holds instincts that keep you alive, boundaries that protect you, and raw energy that fuels your purpose. To destroy it would be to destroy a part of yourself you cannot replace. This idea is echoed in Taoist philosophy. In the Tao Te Ching, light and dark are not enemies. They are complementary forces. Yin and yang swirl together in an eternal dance, each containing the seed of the other. Harmony is not achieved by choosing one and rejecting the other, but by learning to move with both. Integration, then, is the work of befriending the shadow, not indulging every impulse it offers, but listening to it, understanding its language, and giving it a constructive role in your life. Consider the person who has always suppressed their competitiveness because they associate it with cruelty. Once integrated, that same competitiveness could become the drive to excel in a craft or defend a cause. The trait doesn't disappear, it changes form. Or think of someone who has always repressed their sadness, equating it with weakness. In integration, that sadness can become compassion, the ability to sit with others in their pain without flinching. Jung described this as individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole, where every disowned part is acknowledged and woven into the larger fabric of who you are. The goal is not perfection, but authenticity. A helpful practice is to regularly ask your shadow, "What do you need right now?" Sometimes the answer will be rest, sometimes expression, sometimes a firm boundary. The more you listen, the more the shadow shifts from adversary to ally. One of Jung's students, Marie-Louise von Franz, put it simply, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The work is not about shining so brightly that the darkness vanishes. It's about carrying your light into the darkness so you can see what's there. Integration requires patience. It means you will sometimes act from your shadow, notice it, and try again. It means you will be humbled, often. But humility is the soil in which true strength grows. Here sits the invitation. Think of a trait you've always labeled as bad in yourself. Imagine giving it a seat at your inner council. What role could it play if it were honored, guided, and balanced with your other qualities? When you stop trying to kill your shadow, you free yourself from a war you can never win, and you begin a partnership with a part of yourself that, for all its strangeness, has been on your side all along. There is a version of you that you do not want to meet. We began here, with the shadow that walks just behind you, holding the parts of yourself you've tried to exile. At first it feels like a threat, but now you know it is also a teacher. Through Jung's eyes, and through the wisdom of philosophers and psychologists across centuries, we walked through 6 truths about this hidden self. The shadow you hide shapes the life you live. What you push away does not disappear. It writes your story in secret. Your judgments reveal more about you than about others. Projection is a mirror. Irritation can be a map. Owning the darkness gives you back your power. What you acknowledge cannot control you from the shadows. The shadow holds the keys to your creativity. Buried impulses may be the source of your most vital expression. You cannot heal what you cannot name. Clarity is the doorway to transformation. Integration, not eradication, is the goal. Wholeness means bringing all of yourself to the table, not cutting pieces away. Taken together, these insights point to a difficult but liberating truth. Shadow work is not about becoming pure, it's about becoming whole. It's about standing in the full light of your awareness, knowing that the darkness is not your enemy, it is part of your humanity. This work is not linear. You will circle back to old patterns. You will find new shadows as you grow, and each time you'll face the choice: deny or integrate, turn away or walk toward. Remember, the shadow is not here to humiliate you. It is here to complete you. When you see someone else's flaws and feel the familiar rush of judgment, pause. When an old fear rises and you feel the urge to bury it, breathe. When a forbidden desire whispers, listen. Each of these moments is an invitation. The great danger is to live only in half of yourself, the part you've polished for the world to see. But the great joy is to discover that the other half, for all its darkness, contains the raw material of your aliveness. Here sits the challenge I leave you with. For the next 30 days, keep a small notebook. Each day, write one sentence beginning with, "If I become honest, a part of me," and finish it without censorship. Don't try to fix what you write. Don't justify it. Just name it. If you do this sincerely, you will begin to feel the subtle shift. The river you diverted underground will start to rejoin the surface. Your life will flow with more honesty, more vitality, more choice. Jung called this the path of individuation, the long road toward the person you were always meant to be. It is not the easy road, but it is the only one that leads to a life that is truly your own. If this conversation has stirred something in you, stay with it. Let it work on you in quiet moments. And if you want to keep exploring these questions, subscribe and share your reflections in the comments. This is not a journey anyone completes alone. It is a dialogue we carry together, across time, across voices, across the many selves we are still becoming. Your shadow is waiting, not to destroy you, but to walk with you into a life more whole than you ever imagined.